everybody, and welcome to our YouTube character profile upload for Martha Longhurst. It's a bit of a short one this week, which is why we thought we were trying to pad it out a little bit by doing an intro for you guys here. This came from a fairly early episode of the podcast, episode 47, and I think back then we didn't have much to say about Martha, did we?
Well, not only did we not have a lot to say about Martha, but our profiles are generally quite short compared to how long they go now.
Well, they were always pretty short in the early days of Conversation Street, but I think this was one of the shortest.
Yeah, we had to... Originally, we padded it out with a bit of conversation about ghosts, but we've cut that out for the YouTube because this is not about... It wasn't about Martha, it was about ghosts, even though she was kind of a ghost. Well, you'll find out, won't you, when you listen?
You will. You listened to this afternoon, didn't you?
I did.
Did we kind of say anything other than she sits with Martha? She sits with Ina and then dies.
We talked about her early life and various things that happened.
I think the thing
not a lot did happen though.
No, that's the thing. When you think of the three old cronies in the snug, you think, oh yeah, Ina, Martha and Minnie, they were there for ages, weren't they? But it was literally only a few years that Martha was in the programme. So no, she didn't get up to too much. She was a bit more of a side character. But
I did... We have, since we recorded this, we do know who she is. We have seen her in action.
Yeah, I like her. I'd like to have stayed a bit longer.
She was a bit of a match for Ina, actually.
Yes.
Well, after she died, it was just Ina and Minnie was always a bit of a silly old fuddy-duddy. And Ina ran rings around her, whereas Martha was a bit more shrewd, wasn't she?
Yeah, she would argue back a little bit more.
Sometimes she stood up to Ina.
Yeah, although so did Minnie, I suppose, as she got a bit older and braver.
Minnie let lots of things slide, didn't she?
Yeah.
She wanted a peaceful life, whereas Martha...
It is a shame looking back that Martha was given the old heave-ho quite so soon, and that's what they thought at the time as well, isn't it? Do we talk about this?
Yes, we don't talk...
Well, no spoilers now then.
Well, yeah, there's more interesting parts of that story that we didn't actually get to, but maybe one day we will.
Maybe one day we'll redo her and do a proper one. But for now, let's go back in time 9 years to our character profile of Martha Longhurst. It's classic character profile time. Got a bit of an obscure one this week. We chose it at the beginning of the week because of all the talk about ghosts, and that made me think, oh, can we do something that's linked to the ghost? We've obviously already done Ivy, who's the street's most infamous ghost after that storyline, but I did a bit of research into what other supernatural goings-on have there been in the street, and found out that back in the 70s, Betty was convinced that Martha Longhurst's ghost was still haunting the Rovers, so we thought we'd really drag back through the annals of Coronation Street history this week, and have Martha Longhurst as our classic character profile. Not anyone that I can say Gemma and I really knew anything about up until this point. But for those listeners who also might not know, she's one of the three Rovers old ladies. There was Ina Sharples, Minnie Caldwell, and Martha Longhurst. Martha was the one with the glasses.
She was born, incredibly, on the 2nd of September, 1896.
Wow, the 2nd of September.
Blimey,
She must have been the oldest in her class.
How many programmes that are still running today and have been running continuously since they started can say they had a character in it that was born in 1896?
Probably none. Pretty old,
Doctor Who was probably born thousands of years before.
She died on the 13th of May 1964, so that was only like 4 years after Corrie started.
Her parents were Jack and Mary Hardley, and she was married to Percy Longhurst in 1919.
Yes, but he died before Coronation Street started, so we never met old Perce.
She had two children, Lily Haddon and Harold Longhurst. She first appeared on the 14th of December 1960 in episode 2, and she last appeared on the 13th of May 1964 in episode 357. She was in 298 episodes and played by Lynn Carroll.
So the fact that she was in 298 episodes, she was in pretty much all the episodes that were broadcast between... or in the time that she was on, wasn't she? She didn't have much of a break in that, even though her character didn't really do very much. There's just a little preview of we're going to be getting through this quite quickly today. So, yeah, she, like I said before, she was very well remembered of being like one of the Rovers 3. But like many of the old characters, a backstory was written for her by like some of the fiction books, the wartime fiction books that were published, I don't know when. So in 1919, she married Percy Longhurst after having relationships with people called Handel Gartside and Ted Ashley.
Handel Gartside?
Yeah, he comes back later, I think.
Brilliant
That's a great name. They had their daughter Lily and a son Harold. She was very... She spoke apparently a lot about Lily and how wonderful her daughter was, but Lily didn't really want to have very much to do with her because she got married to this rich bloke called Wilf.
This sounds like Mrs. Bouquet and her son Sheridan.
It is a little bit like that, isn't it?
Room for the pony.
Yeah. But I think Ina annoyed Martha at some point by saying that Wilf got all his money because he had 2 jobs. Ooh.
What?
During the Blitz, Martha was feared dead at one point after her house was blown up, although she wasn't there at the time, so that was all right. Apparently she then comes walking in and says, "What happened to me house?" or something like that. I can only imagine because it was written down, it wasn't on the show.
You wouldn't need to ask during the Blitz, would you? What happened to my house?
She moved into number 13 Coronation Street until her house was rebuilt. So that was basically it for before Coronation Street. In 1960... Oh no, this is before Corrie as well. Percy died. And then one of the first main storylines that she was in was she was asked to take over Ina's position as caretaker of the Glad Tidings Mission Hall.
That sounds brilliant as well.
Well,
Why don't you bring that back? That's what they should put the spare shop as.
Yeah, bring back the Glad Tidings Mission Hall. While Ina was in hospital, Ina thought that Martha was after her job, so she discharged herself from hospital and then kicked her out. The next year, her life was made very difficult when Ina was sacked from her position and evicted and then had to move in with Martha. We all know what a bit of a cantankerous old lady Ina Sharples was and how difficult she must have been to have lived with. And it drove Martha to write to an agony aunt even to ask how she could deal with her, which is a bit bizarre. I didn't even realise they had agony aunts back then, but...
Yeah, I think they had them in even Victorian times, I think, when they used to have the ladies' periodicals.
Oh, really? Well, it turns out anyway that Minnie had pointed Ina in Martha's direction because originally Ina wanted to live with Minnie, but she didn't think that she'd be able to cope with Ina living with her. In 1963, shocking storyline, Martha lost Ina's pension book because it was her job to go and collect all the pensions.
That's just terrible.
Yes, but it was recovered. It's okay. They had high drama back in these days. She also became the cleaner at the Rovers' return in 1963. Now, in 1964, her old flame Ted Ashley made a reappearance after 50 years in Australia.
Australia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just want to say it like that.
For no reason. She thought that he was interested in her, and when he went back to London, she even followed him down to the smoke with him, but alas, he was not interested at all, so she came back with her tail between her legs. And she was apparently quite often very optimistic about sort of finding love in later years, whereas Ina and Minnie were like, no, your time's over, you've had your life. So it's quite nice to have a contrast between the women, I guess.
Well, it turns out they were right, really, weren't they?
Yeah, well, she got her first passport later that year, which she was very, very proud of having, and she had plans to jet off. I think she was going to go to the Costa del Sol for something. And then,
a week.
Yes, and then there was a party going on in the Rovers, and I can't remember who it was. Frank Barlow was doing a party or something, I think I read, and she was there as well, clutching her passport because she was about to jet off the next day, but tragically passed away in the snug. Yeah, well, that's quite a commonly shown scene on Corrie clip shows because she's there and she acts it very well, and she's like, obviously looks like she's suffering and she's hot, and she takes her hat off and then just collapses there on the table, and then I might even be in the next episode that Len Fairclough, I think, or somebody discovered her, and that was only the 6th death they'd had on Coronation Street, although I'd say out of the 5 that came before her, that was probably one of the biggest ones there.
Well, it certainly stood the test of time, I would say.
Definitely, because I think Ken Barlow's mum might have died before then, but I don't know. I don't know anything about that. What an awful fan I am. After she died, she was still mentioned occasionally in the show. For example, during the Lakes trip in 1969, Ina said about how Martha would have loved to have gone. And then we had this storyline in 1975 where Betty thought that she'd seen Martha's glasses in the snug, and she thought she'd heard her voice as well. I don't think Betty knew Martha, but she kind of through talking to people, put two and two together. Ina was convinced that Martha was haunting it. And they tried to contact her with a Ouija board, which I've never seen, but I'd quite be interested to see that episode.
Funny, yeah.
But it turns out that they just belonged to a customer, those glasses. 15 years after Martha's death in 1979, Ina kind of raised the glass to her and she was mentioned again. And then in 2011 even, Martha Longhurst's ghost was jokingly mentioned by Dennis as well, even though he wasn't around in the show when all this ghost fiasco was going on in the 70s.
Nice. So there you go. There are ghosts in Coronation Street, and she was one.
Yeah.
Even though she wasn't actually really ever haunting anybody.
Yeah. So we said how memorable Martha's death was, and it was actually a very controversial decision at the time. The producer, Tim Aspinall, wanted to kill her off, and Violet Carson, who played Ina Sharples, almost refused to take part in Martha's final scenes, sort of in protest that her mate was being killed off.
Aww.
Yeah. And as was kind of commonly done back then, viewers sent flowers to Granada Studios as well in respect to the dear departed
people
character.
probably still do that now. If it was a really beloved character, I don't know.
I don't know whether they do or not, or whether we've kind of grown past that.
Maybe become more cynical and less caring.
Yeah.